Welcome to the channel. If epic sci-fi stories are your thing, you've just found your new home. Subscribe, like, and share the adventure. The screaming started at exactly 1400 hours. Galactic Standard Time. Ambassador Kira nearly dropped her translator device as the sound tore through the pristine corridors of the Zenith Council chambers. It wasn't the refined diplomatic shriek of outrage she'd grown accustomed to during her 3 years representing Earth. This was something primal, desperate, and utterly terrifying. What in the void was that? Muttered Counselor Vex, his usually composed blue features twisted with alarm. The tall, elegant being had spent the better part of the morning session mocking humanity's barbaric historical tendencies. As he so eloquently put it, the emergency klaxons began wailing, drowning out any response Kira might have offered. Through the massive crystalline windows of the council chamber, she could see the sprawling cityscape of New Harmony, the crown jewel of the Galactic Alliance, in complete chaos. Beings of dozens of species were running through the streets, their panic visible even from this height. "Council members, please remain calm," came the voice of Prime Director Zan over the intercom system. His usual authoritative tone carried an edge Kira had never heard before. "We are experiencing a technical malfunction with our newest acquisition." Kira's blood ran cold. The newest acquisition. She knew exactly what that meant. 3 months ago, the Galactic Alliance had liberated an ancient Earth artifact from what they deemed humanity's primitive museum system. The Human Collective Archive. They called it a massive quantum storage device containing the complete recorded history of Earth civilizations. The Alliance had claimed it was too dangerous to remain in human hands, too violent and disturbing, for a species they deemed barely evolved beyond their savage origins. The irony hadn't been lost on Kira. These same beings who sneered at humanity's past had been utterly fascinated by it, studying Earth's wars, conflicts, and struggles with the detached amusement of academics examining insects under glass. Another scream echoed through the chamber, closer this time. Counselor Nex, who had spent considerable time last week describing human warfare as quaint brutality, was backing toward the emergency exits, his 6 eyes wide with terror. "The archive," Kira whispered, realization dawning. "You didn't just study our history. You tried to experience it." Vex turned to her, his blue skin now pale as moonlight. "The immersion protocols were supposed to be completely safe. Limited exposure, full mental safeguards. What did you choose?" Kira's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "Which period of human history did you decide to play with?" The lights flickered, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of running feet and panicked voices mixing with what sounded distinctly like primitive war cries. "It was supposed to be educational," Vex stammered. "We selected the most comprehensive period we could find. The one your species seemed to find most instructive about the nature of survival." Kira's heart sank. She knew which period they meant. The one humanity never spoke about in polite company. The one that had shaped their entire understanding of what it meant to fight for existence itself. "You chose the Dark Ages," she said flatly. "Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. HFY Chronicle Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you." The emergency doors burst open, and what stumbled through wasn't the refined Galactic Alliance security team Kira expected. Instead, figures in crude armor fashioned from available materials lurched into the chamber, their eyes wild with the desperate hunger of beings who had learned that survival meant taking what you needed from those too weak to keep it. But these weren't humans. These were the same pompous alien dignitaries who had mocked Earth's past, now transformed by their immersion into humanity's darkest historical period. They had experienced firsthand what it meant to live when civilization collapsed, when every day was a battle against starvation, disease, and death, and they had learned to fight like humans, the first thing that struck Kira about the transformed beings wasn't their improvised weapons or their crude armor, it was their eyes. Gone was the intellectual superiority, the detached amusement with which they had viewed human history. In its place burned something far more dangerous, the desperate intelligence of survivors who had learned that mercy was a luxury they couldn't afford. Fascinating, whispered Dr. Wren, the human scientist who had designed the original archive. He stood beside Kira in the observation deck, his face pressed against the reinforced glass as they watched the chaos unfold below. The neural immersion appears to have exceeded all parameters. They're not just remembering human history, they're living it. 3 floors below them, what had once been the dignified council chambers had become a medieval battlefield. Counselor Vex, who had sneered at humanity's primitive weaponry just hours earlier, now wielded a jury-rigged plasma cutter like a war axe, his movements showing the brutal efficiency of someone who had learned that hesitation meant death. How long were they under? Kira asked, though she dreaded the answer. 6 hours real time, Dr. Wren replied. But the temporal compression ratio was set to maximum. In their experience, they lived through nearly 40 years of Earth's dark ages. 40 years. 4 decades of plague, famine, constant warfare, and the collapse of everything they had once considered civilization. 40 years of learning that the only law was strength, the only currency was violence, and the only god was survival. My God, Kira breathed. What have you done? Through the glass, she watched former Ambassador Lux, a being who had once eloquently argued for the peaceful evolution of Lesser Species Corner, a group of maintenance staff. His refined features were scarred now, marked by battles that had never actually happened, but felt more real than any experience of his previous life. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded through fear rather than respect. Give us your rations, he growled in broken standard, his usual linguistic elegance replaced by the blunt efficiency of someone who had learned that pretty words wouldn't fill an empty belly. We know you have them, hidden away while others starve. The maintenance workers, members of various peaceful species, trembled before this transformed being. They had never seen violence like this, didn't understand the casual brutality that came from decades of struggle. But we don't, one of them began. Lux's improvised blade was at the speaker's throat before he could finish the sentence. Lying means death, he said simply. We learned that in the plague years, when the cities burned and the weak died first. Kira realized with growing horror that the transformed beings weren't just acting out human history. They had internalized the lessons that had made humanity's ancestors so formidable. They had learned what it meant to be human during the worst of times, and they were applying those lessons with the desperate efficiency of beings who had experienced true desperation. The containment fields, she said urgently to Dr. Wren. Can you restore them? Negative. They overloaded the system when they broke free. The neural bridges are still active. They're still partially connected to the archive, still experiencing the memories. On the screens around them, emergency feeds showed similar scenes throughout the facility. Former counselors who had dismissed human military tactics as unnecessarily brutal now moved with the coordinated precision of warriors who had learned their craft in the crucible of actual warfare. They had experienced the siege of cities, the desperation of last stands, the weight of decisions where every choice meant life or death for their people, and they were applying those lessons to the present. They're not random, Kira observed. Studying their movements. Look at the pattern, she was right. The transformed beings weren't acting like mindless barbarians. They were demonstrating the hard-won strategic thinking that had allowed humanity's ancestors to survive their darkest centuries. They were securing resources, establishing defensive positions, and creating the hierarchies necessary for survival. In a hostile world. They're rebuilding medieval society, Dr. Wren whispered in amazement. Right here, right now. They're applying everything they learned. Through the chaos, Kira began to see the terrible beauty of what was happening. These beings had spent years studying human history from the outside, treating it like an academic exercise. Now they understood what it had really meant to be human during those dark centuries, and they were showing the rest of the galaxy exactly why humanity had emerged from those times as something to be reckoned with. The transformation accelerated with each passing hour, and Kira watched in fascination as the former galactic elite reorganized themselves into something resembling a medieval human society. But this wasn't the sanitized version they had studied in their academic texts. This was the raw, desperate pragmatism that had allowed human civilization to survive its darkest periods. Former Prime Director Zan had declared himself Lord Protector of the facility, his usual bureaucratic demeanor replaced by the iron authority of someone who had learned to command through proven strength rather than inherited position. His court consisted of the former counselors, now organized into a rigid hierarchy based on their demonstrated value during the crisis rather than their previous political standings. Remarkable, Dr. Wren murmured, still documenting everything through his portable scanner. They've established a feudal system in less than 12 hours. Look at how they've organized the resource distribution. Kira studied the feeds. Former Ambassador Lux, now calling himself Marshal of the Walls, had established rationing protocols that mirrored the desperate efficiency of siege-era resource management. Every piece of food, every functioning tool, every scrap of material was being allocated based on contribution to the group's survival rather than previous rank or species. It was brutally fair in a way that the previous galactic system had never been. They're not just copying human history, she realized. They're improving on it. They have technology, knowledge, and capabilities that medieval humans never possessed. Through the observation windows, she watched a group of former researchers beings who had once mocked human primitive engineering work together to construct defensive barriers using their advanced knowledge of material science. They were applying quantum field theory to create medieval fortifications, using their understanding of energy dynamics to forge weapons that would have been impossible during Earth's actual dark ages. We need to contact Earth Command, Kira said urgently. They need to know what's happening here. Communications are down, Dr. Wren replied. The transformed beings cut all external links hours ago. They're not taking any chances. Of course they weren't. They had lived through 40 years of human medieval experience, including the countless betrayals, the foreign invasions, the political machinations that had shaped that era. They understood instinctively that isolation was survival, that controlling information was power. A new sound echoed through the facility, rhythmic, chanting in a language that seemed to blend various galactic tongues with ancient human dialects. Through the screens, Kira could see groups of the transformed beings gathered in what had once been the facility's central plaza, their voices rising in unison. What are they saying? She asked. Dr. Wren consulted his translation matrix, frowning at the results. It's not exactly translatable. But the core concept appears to be a pledge of mutual defense, a vow to protect their people against all threats, internal and external. Kira felt a chill run down her spine. She recognized the sentiment, even if she couldn't understand the words. It was the same pledge that had bound human communities together during their darkest centuries, the promise that had allowed scattered groups of survivors to eventually rebuild civilization. But there was something else in their chanting, something that made her deeply uneasy. These beings hadn't just learned to survive like humans. They had learned to think like humans. And human thinking, forged in the crucible of medieval survival, was fundamentally different from the cooperative idealism that had shaped galactic civilization. They're planning something, she said. What makes you say that? Before Kira could answer, the facility's main screen flickered to life. Former Prime Director Zan appeared, but the being addressing them bore little resemblance to the diplomatic bureaucrat they had known. His clothes were now a strange hybrid of formal galactic attire and medieval practicality, his posture radiating the confidence of someone who had learned to lead through proven competence rather than committee consensus. "Citizens of the galaxy," he began, his voice carrying a new authority. "You have watched us with amusement as we studied the humans and their violent past. You have dismissed their history as primitive brutality, their struggles as evidence of their evolutionary inferiority." The camera pulled back, revealing the transformed beings assembled behind him, a court of former diplomats and scientists, who now carried themselves like seasoned warriors and cunning advisors. "We have lived their history," Zan continued. "We have experienced their struggles. We have learned their lessons. And now we understand a truth that none of us grasped before. The humans were not primitive, they were being forged, shaped by fire and blood and desperate necessity into something stronger than any of us imagined possible." Kira's blood ran cold as she recognized the implications of his words. "They're not just planning to survive," she whispered. "They're planning to expand." The first attack came at dawn, Galactic Standard Time, and it was nothing like the chaotic violence the facility's security systems had been designed to handle. This was coordinated, strategic, and ruthlessly efficient, the kind of warfare that had allowed medieval human armies to conquer vast territories with limited resources. Kira watched from the emergency command center as former counselors who had once debated the ethics of economic sanctions now led assault teams with the tactical precision of seasoned military commanders. They had learned their lessons well during their 40-year immersion in human medieval experience, and they were applying those lessons with devastating effect. "They've taken the spaceport," reported Commander Vale, the facility's head of security. His voice carried the strain of someone who had watched his carefully planned defenses crumble in hours. "Not just captured it, they fortified it, turned it into something resembling a medieval castle, but with energy barriers and automated defenses." "Casualties?" Kira asked. "Minimal, actually. They're not killing unnecessarily, they're converting." Vale's confusion was evident. "They're offering choice to anyone they capture. Join their new order or face exile. Most are choosing to join." That stopped Kira cold. "They're recruiting? More than that. They're demonstrating that their system works. The beings who join them get better food, better protection, clear roles, and responsibilities. It's..." He paused, struggling with the admission. "It's more efficient than our previous system." Through the command center's screens, Kira could see the truth of his words. The areas under the transformed being's control were running with clockwork precision. Former enemies worked side by side, united by their shared commitment to survival and prosperity under the new order. The rigid hierarchies weren't oppressive, they were liberating, giving every individual a clear path to advancement based on merit and contribution. "They've learned the most dangerous lesson from human history," Dr. Wren observed grimly. "That effective governance doesn't require consensus, it requires competence and commitment." The main screen flickered again, and Lord Protector Zan appeared, now wearing what could only be described as a fusion of galactic technology and medieval regalia. Behind him stood his council of former peers, each now bearing the titles and responsibilities of medieval nobility adapted for a spacefaring civilization. "People of the galaxy," Zan began, his voice carrying across the emergency broadcast network. "We offer you a choice that our ancestors never had, the opportunity to join a society that actually works." The camera panned to show the transformed areas of the facility. What had been sterile, efficient, but emotionally cold spaces had become something warmer communities where beings worked together, with the fierce loyalty that came from shared struggle and mutual dependence. "You have lived under systems that promised equality, but delivered mediocrity," Zan continued. That spoke of peace but ignored the fundamental truth that peace without strength is merely delayed conquest. We offer you something different, a society based on the principles that allowed humanity to survive their darkest centuries and emerge stronger. Kira realized with growing alarm that his message was resonating. Emergency feeds from across the facility showed beings watching the broadcast with obvious interest. The transformed beings weren't just offering an alternative government, they were offering an alternative way of being. The humans understood something we forgot, Zan said, his words carrying the weight of lived experience. That civilization is not a natural state. It must be built, defended, and constantly renewed. It requires sacrifice, discipline, and the willingness to make hard choices for the greater good. He's right, whispered Commander Vale, and Kira heard the dangerous note of conviction in his voice. Everything he's saying, it makes sense. Our system is weak, inefficient. We've been maintaining peace through apathy, not strength. You can't be serious, Kira said, but even as she spoke, she could see the seeds of doubt in his eyes. The truth was that the Galactic Alliance had been stagnating for decades. Their commitment to consensus and peaceful resolution had created a system where nothing significant ever changed, where problems were managed rather than solved, where individual excellence was discouraged in favor of comfortable mediocrity. Transformed beings offered something different, a system where merit mattered, where contribution was rewarded, where every individual had both responsibilities and genuine opportunities for advancement. Join us, Zan concluded, his message now clearly directed at the facility's remaining population. Help us build something worthy of the challenges we face, or remain in your comfortable weakness and watch as the galaxy leaves you behind. The broadcast ended, but its impact was immediate. Across the facility, beings began to move, not fleeing from the transformed zones, but moving toward them. They were choosing to join the new order, drawn by the promise of purpose and the demonstration of effectiveness. We're losing them, Commander Vale said quietly, and I'm not sure we should be trying to stop it. Kira stared at the screens, watching as the last bastion of the old galactic order prepared to fall, not through conquest, but through conversion. The transformed beings had learned humanity's most dangerous lesson, that people would choose effective hierarchy over ineffective equality, would choose meaningful struggle over comfortable stagnation, and they were proving that lesson with every passing hour. The surrender came not with violence, but with a simple announcement over the facility's communication system. Commander Vale's voice was steady, almost relieved, as he formally transferred authority to Lord Protector Zan and his transformed council. Citizens of Research Facility Harmony, Vale said. Effective immediately, this facility is under new management. All personnel are invited to the Central Plaza for integration into our new social structure. Kira stood in the observation deck, watching the last chapter of galactic civilization as she had known it. Below, beings from dozens of species lined up in orderly fashion, awaiting assignment to their new roles in the medieval-inspired hierarchy that had emerged from humanity's archived history. But this wasn't conquest, it was evolution. They're not forcing anyone, Dr. Wren observed, his scientific fascination overriding his personal concerns. Look at the integration process. Every being is being evaluated for their skills, interests, and aptitudes. They're being placed where they can contribute most effectively. It was true. Former researchers were being assigned to improve the new society's technology. Former diplomats were becoming liaisons between different species groups. Former maintenance workers were being elevated to oversee critical infrastructure. The rigid medieval hierarchy wasn't about oppression, it was about optimization. The fascinating part, Dr. Wren continued, is that they've retained the emotional core of medieval human society while adapting its structure for a spacefaring civilization. They understand that loyalty and purpose are more important than individual freedom, that shared struggle creates stronger bonds than individual comfort. Through the screens, Kira watched Lord Protector Zan hold court in what had once been the facility's main conference room. Former counselors knelt before him not in servility, but in the formal acknowledgement of hierarchy that had bound medieval human societies together. Each swore an oath of loyalty and service, receiving in return a clear role, specific responsibilities, and the promise of advancement based on merit. "It's working," she admitted reluctantly. "They're happier, more purposeful, more unified than they ever were under the Alliance system." "Of course it's working," came a familiar voice behind them. Kira turned to see Ambassador Lux, now Marshal of the Walls, approaching with 2 guards. His transformation was complete. The elegant diplomat had become a scarred warrior leader, whose very presence radiated competence and authority. "You're not our prisoners," Lux continued, surprising them both. "Lord Protector Zan wants to speak with you. He believes you might be able to help us understand something important." The throne room, for that's what the former conference room had become, was a study in practical grandeur. Advanced technology merged seamlessly with medieval aesthetics, creating a space that was both functionally efficient and emotionally inspiring. Lord Protector Zan sat upon a chair that was simultaneously a seat of power and a command console. His transformed council arrayed around him in perfect order. "Ambassador Kira," Zan said, rising to greet her with the courtesy that medieval nobility had shown to respected adversaries. "We owe you a debt of gratitude." "For what?" "For representing humanity so faithfully that we finally understood what we were really studying." His smile was warm, but carried the weight of lived experience. "We thought we were examining primitives. Instead, we were learning from masters." "You've condemned the galaxy to chaos," Kira said, though her words lacked conviction. "Have we?" Zan gestured to the screens around them, showing the facility's transformation. "Look at what we've built in less than 24 hours. Purpose instead of apathy. Unity instead of division. Progress instead of stagnation." Kira had to admit the results were impressive. The facility ran with clockwork precision, its inhabitants working together with an enthusiasm that had been entirely absent under the previous system. "The humans taught us that civilization is not about comfort," Zan continued. "It's about creating something worth preserving, something worth fighting for. Your species survived their dark ages because they learned that survival requires sacrifice, leadership requires responsibility, and peace requires strength. And now we carry that lesson to the stars." Zan's voice carried the quiet certainty of someone who had found his purpose. "We will build a civilization worthy of the challenges ahead. One that can face any threat, overcome any obstacle, because it is built on the foundation of proven strength rather than comfortable weakness." Kira realized with a mix of horror and admiration that they had succeeded beyond anyone's imagination. They had not just survived their immersion in human history, they had been transformed by it into something that might actually be better than what came before. "The galaxy will resist," she warned. "Let them," Zan replied. "We learned from the humans that resistance makes the final victory sweeter, and the final peace more lasting." As Kira was escorted to her new quarters' comfortable rooms, befitting her status as an honored guest rather than a prisoner, she reflected on the irony of it all. The Galactic Alliance had sought to understand humanity by studying their past, only to discover that humanity's past was not a burden to be overcome, but a gift to be shared. The humans had laughed at being called primitive. Now the galaxy would learn exactly why. Outside her window, the first ships were already departing for other worlds, carrying the transformed beings and their hard-won wisdom to the farthest reaches of space. The age of comfortable mediocrity was ending. The age of earned strength had begun.